Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name's Andrew and I work at Action Your Potential. We were at Crestwood, both sites, Shakespeare and Cherbourg, on Thursday last week. Students were fantastic. We worked with Year 10, focused on the habits I'm going to talk to you about. But this stuff is not just for them, it's for you as well. So what we do is we teach people about how their brains work, and we teach people to become neuro ninjas. So I'm going to cut my camera now so the slides remain nice and sharp, and just walk you through what we spoke to students about. So you've got all this information and you can then help them to begin to build the habits. In fact, we both, Darren and I, left them with some habits to build that week. So what is a neuro ninja, you might ask yourself? A neuro ninja is somebody that understands their brain to be able to live in it, but not get lost in it every single day, and understand the neuroscience. What neuroscience is telling us now that is our brain is changeable throughout our lives. And once we understand that, we can begin to change our daily habits, which will go back into the system of our brain and begin to change what our brain is capable of doing. Preparing for GCSEs is as much about the habits that we build as it is anything to do with ability. In fact, we were saying to students that it's not about ability, it's about what you do each day. Neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain can change, means that what we do makes a massive difference. So our brain is amazing. It's not perhaps the most attractive object in the known universe, but it is the only object in the universe that even knows there's a universe. 300 trillion connections in there. A single dice-sized cube of brain tissue has got 700 times more storage capacity than the computer that is projecting this webinar via Zoom to you. So it's an incredible, powerful organ, and it generates us. The brain is full of biases that make us feel as if we're in charge running the show. We emerge from our brain's operation. So our brain projects our mind, and that's really important when we talk about things like well-being, which was one of the things that we talked about. So our message is full of hope and excitement and, upsettingly, hard work as well. What we said to the students is, in the future, opportunities in the present feel like hard work. We're going to need to build the neural architecture to pass our GCSEs. But once we've learned how to do that, we can then take that idea of how we change our brain and then begin to build whatever skills we need in our brain ahead of time. So we said to the students, and they were brilliant, they were really great, you have everything you need at the top of your neck. And when we were talking to the students, we arranged the information in packets. So we talked about focus and attention and learning routines. We mentioned worry and stress, but I'm not going to talk about that tonight because I haven't got time, because we had an hour and 15 minutes with the students, and this is a half-an-hour webinar. But I will send you some information about worries and stress. So we talked about the fact that our brain is changed by 4 forces every day. 4 psychosocial forces, 4 psychological and sociological forces change our brain. Changed your brain today, change my brain today, change your children's brain today. Those 4 forces are our habits, our daily habits. What we do each day changes our brain, both positively and negatively. Our relationships with other people, family and friends, and our relationships with ourselves change our brain. And obviously those 2 things, relationships with family and friends and with ourselves, are intimately linked to each other. And finally, our goals change our brain. So being a neuro ninja becomes about taking some of these forces and applying them deliberately to improve our experience, developing a new goal, building a specifically powerful habit, working on relationships. Neuro ninjas understand that we're sculpting our brain every single day, and human brains have got the ability to understand themselves in a way that no other animal's brain on the planet has got. We've got enough bandwidth for the brain to understand about itself, and insight is a skill. So we know what sight is, seeing in the world. Insight is noticing what's happening in our head in terms of our thoughts, because any thought we have, even the most upsetting and scary thought, is just a thought. But when we're having a very upsetting and scary thought, for example, we're feeling really anxious, it doesn't feel like a thought. It feels real. It feels like the thing we're worried about, I'm going to fail all my exams, is going to happen. But actually, that's not necessarily the case at all. The worry system of the brain generates these very strong thoughts. And insight is about knowing and noticing, excuse me, and noticing that actually those thoughts are just thoughts and we can respond to them differently. Excuse me. So the key rule that we taught the students about their brain is, if you repeatedly practice something, your brain and body make it easier for you to do that thing, whether that thing is good for you or not. So if you practice your French vocab, you get better at French vocab. If you practice worrying and overthinking, you get better at worrying and overthinking. And our brain cells are alive. They move and they make connections within 15 or 20 minutes. And you can see this neuron on the left is passing that electrical impulse very slowly down its length, whereas the one on the right, the information is moving much, much faster, 240 miles an hour to be precise. That is learning. That neuron on the left has learned, on the right, sorry, has learned stuff. And that's what happens in neuroplasticity. How do we turn the neuron in the left to the neuron on the right? We do that through practice. And this is the kicker. This is the key idea we spoke to students about. If you don't like something, like you don't like English, or you don't like maths, or you don't like history, that doesn't matter. If you practice that thing, your brain will get better at doing that thing. Obviously, it's tricky to sit down and do something that you find challenging or boring. But if you sit down and do that thing, you will get better at it. Whereas if you have a growth defeating belief that I can't get better at English, I can't get better at maths, you won't even try, and then you won't change your brain. So we've got this process of neuroplasticity, and we wanted students to think about their brains in a different way, to think that actually at the front of their brain, there are two sets of circuits, some at the top of the forehead and some at the bottom of the forehead, that end up in arguments with each other. Your brain cells, there are 86 billion of them, arranged in different circuits, and they argue with each other. You hear that argument. You hear them arguing with each other when you're in front of the fridge in the evening, thinking, I won't have that bar of chocolate. And the bottom of your brain is saying, well, maybe you should. You're in that back and forth. I should do my homework, says the student's brain. But then the bottom of the student's brain says, no, I want to play Xbox. That is a battle that we have every day. And in the circuits at the bottom of the prefrontal cortex, that's where we're reactive and emotional. So if we're on TikTok a lot, we're strengthening these circuits. One of the reasons there's so much anxiety in the world now is because people are strengthening their reactive circuitry on screens every day. It's all of us. It's not just children. It's all of us. We're strengthening our reactive circuitry, which makes it harder to focus and concentrate. And if we have really tricky things going on in our lives, it's quite difficult to drag our thoughts away from those things because we've got this strong reactive circuitry. So if the reactive circuitry is in charge, we don't do our homework. If circuits at the top of our prefrontal cortex are stronger, if we strengthen them by exercising, by reading, etc., we can manage the bottom of our brain and get the hard stuff done, like doing our homework before playing Xbox, like making sure we do those past papers and revise before the exam. So what we do begins to shape our brain. That process is called neuroplasticity. And what we also know is that stress and anxiety, when we're stressed and anxious, drains blood from the thinking parts of our brain, the very bits that will pass exams. That seems a bit upsetting. Why would the brain do that? Well, actually, to understand the effect of stress on the brain, and particularly the thinking parts of the brain, we have to go back in time and understand where the brain evolved. It evolved on the African savanna and kept us survived against predators, etc. So when the stress system kicks on, it is harking back to a time when we had to run to survive. And you don't want necessarily, as you're running away from a tiger or a saber-toothed tiger, you don't want to be thinking about that. So blood actually would be better used in the muscles of your legs to help you run faster. So that's why stress and anxiety hits the thinking parts of our brain. So we've got to keep our brain calm. We've got to build a commodity you may not have thought about before. We've talked to students about this commodity, mental flexibility. Think about your busy lives. Think about all the things you do every day. Think about students passing their exams. They need mental flexibility. That's bandwidth. It's the ability to juggle and deal with complexity. Exams are complex things. We need to build mental flexibility. Now, the body and brain produce the mind, just like a projector throwing up an image. In the morning, as we emerge from sleep, we go through that groggy period, sleep inertia, and the brain builds that day's mind, and we need mental flexibility. We talked to students first in relation to preparing for exams about their well-being. The most important thing is for them to understand that they are the asset in their own lives. They need to look after themselves every single day. We all need to look after ourselves every single day. If we give our body what it needs, our brain what it needs, we are living in a mind that is much, much better and the best version of ourselves, rather than the grumpy person lacking memory, for example. For example, if you get less than 6 hours sleep, you are twice as anxious the next day and you've got 30% less memory. If you don't exercise, your brain doesn't grow connections. When we exercise, our brain builds new connections, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It accelerates the process of learning and memory construction. Every single one of those rocks builds good connections, helps the brain fire in a balanced way. Walking outside, for example, calms down some of the worry system. Listening to music is fantastic for lots of circuits in the brain. And we were saying to the students, how many of these rocks did you get in the last 24 hours? And interestingly, many of them managed to get maybe 5 or 6. Some students managed to get 12, which was brilliant. And some students were really, really low on this list. And we were saying, if you had an iPad, brand new iPad, and you took it into the garden and buried it in the ground, and then you brought it in the next day and started complaining to everyone who would listen that it's not working, you'd only have yourself to blame because it had been buried in the ground. It's wet, it's covered in soil. But if you don't get enough exercise, if you don't sleep, if you don't practice a bit of meditation, if you don't manage your emotions, connect with family and friends, do something you love, learn, play, create, and read, you're not giving your brain what it needs to build the best version of you. We know that this is true. 50% of how we feel each day is down to what we've done in the previous 24 hours. So we wanted to make that point to the students. That's really important. And mental flexibility is built in a memory structure called the hippocampus. Deep in the brain is a structure that orchestrates the formation of new memories, called the hippocampus. Those new memories are constructed because of new cells growing in the hippocampus. It's called a neurogenesis, hippocampal neurogenesis. The hippocampus helps us build new memories, and it grows 700 neurons a day. If we see a reduction in the growth of neurons in the hippocampus, we see a reduction in a person's mood and mental flexibility. We see people getting stuck, anxious, and depressed. So those new cells need to be built, and those 12 rocks support the construction of those new cells. Those new cells help us regulate our emotions and our moods, help us build memory, help us integrate new learning, help us flex our response in the face of change. So resilience, managing complexity and keeping going, dealing with exams without freaking out, is about keeping networks at the top of the prefrontal cortex healthy and strong and well connected, because those circuits help us manage the rest of our brain. Think of the brain like a parliament of brain cells. Instead of MPs, there are billions of neurons in an argument with each other. In order to get anything to happen in the House of Commons, you've got Lindsay Hoyle, the speaker, who gets people to speak in order so they don't talk over each other. We've got the prefrontal cortex, which acts a bit like air traffic control. It suppresses circuits so we can focus our attention. It helps us get tasks started. It helps us manage our brain. So that process of building those circuits at the top of our brain helps us navigate our way through each day. We are managing this complex connections across our brain. So we talk to the students about the importance of a plan each night to help them learn and remember, a plan each day to make sure their brain doesn't fall into passive and easy. Without a plan, the prefrontal cortex hasn't got anything to aim the brain at, so we end up doing passive and easy. How many times has that happened? We haven't got a plan, we end up wasting the day. We talk to students about that. And we ask them to think about what helps build the strength in those circuits that manage the brain. And everything on the left-hand side of this seesaw, getting chores done, taking part in challenges, learning routines, mindfulness, reading, exercise, gladden, etc. All of those things strengthen the circuits at the top of the prefrontal cortex, helping us manage our minds and get more stuff done. Everything on the right reduces our ability to manage our brain. So using screens a lot, not having a plan, being on social media a lot, avoiding difficulty and challenge, experiencing emotional pain. If you're in a situation where people are really struggling emotionally, that affects their bandwidth, their ability to manage their brain. So all of these things strengthen the top of the brain, which is going to help students sit down and do the work they need to do and build their well-being. All of these things undermine the ability of the brain to manage itself. And if you think about what many of us do every day, screens feature a lot. Social media features a lot for young people. So that is something they need to be aware of. And if they're on social media, they perhaps need to balance that with a bit of reading. We are reaching down, all of us, from our prefrontal cortex every day to edit and manage our responses. If you put your finger on the palm of a little baby, a newborn baby, it will grab your finger. That's called the palmar reflex. If I was to reach virtually through the screen and put my finger on your palm now, as you're listening to this, you wouldn't grab my finger. And the reason you wouldn't grab my finger, despite the fact that's a weird idea, that virtual finger reaching through the screen, you wouldn't grab my finger because you're suppressing that reflex. You're managing that reflex and suppressing it. So we're editing our stories every single day. So we then, having talked about well-being, having talked about building the top of the brain, we then started to talk about the GCSE problem. Can I apologize for my puppy barking crazily in the background? So we're here to solve the GCSE problem, we said to the students, but we need to understand what the problem is for the brain. The problem is this. Imagine a stack of paper from the ceiling to the floor. That's what you're being taught over 2 years. And in 18 months' time, year 10 students are going to be examined on all of that information, but not all of it. They're going to be examined on just 20% of it. We don't know which 20%. And we're all living in brains that forget information rapidly. Within an hour, brains have forgotten 56% of their experience. So we demonstrated this to students with a little activity. We asked volunteers to tell us what they did lesson 1 the previous day. And to a person in all my groups at Shakespeare anyway, not a single person could remember what they did the previous day in lesson 1. So there is the problem in a nutshell. We can't remember what we did yesterday, and I would include all of us in this, but we've got to regurgitate it in 15 months' time. So we need to change our strategy. One of the biggest issues for all the students we support is procrastination, wasting time rather than being productive. We wanted to help them build powerful habits that help them build their confidence and help them challenge procrastination. We said people don't decide their futures, people decide their daily habits, and their daily habits decide their futures. And tiny changes go back into the neurally plastic brain and begin to change it. Students have already done this in their lives. If they love football, they train, they get better at football. If they love dance, they train and rehearse, they get better at dance. So actually, we can all change our brains. We do it by building a new habit, a small and simple act, being aware what we want to change, choosing to do it, trying it out, and then once we've established that habit, stretching it. So we wanted to introduce them to a key set of learning routines. It is so powerful to be working with year 10, because if they build this habit as learning as they go along, they won't have as much revision to do at the end of year 11. We know this works because we do lots of one-to-one coaching sessions with students. We'll be doing some with students at Crestwood as well. And that's what I'm doing this evening around this webinar, one-to-one coaching sessions, supporting students to pass their A-levels, their GCSEs, supporting nurses to pass their exams, supporting accountants to pass their exams, helping people understand their brains. So let's talk through the habits that we ask students to begin to develop. The first one is the first one we ask them to do for the next week. It's called study capture. It's really simple. You get home from school and you sit down and you think, what subject did I have lesson 1? Oh, I had biology. And what was the topic? Oh, the topic was photosynthesis. And write down a key takeaway, 1 sentence about that lesson. So we did photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is plants using sunlight energy to make glucose. You might put a few keywords in the keyword column, and then you rate your understanding. Red, I didn't really understand that. Amber, it's okay, but I need to go over it. Green, I'm really, really stuck. Sorry, I'm really, really clear on it. I know what I need to do. And that information is nice and clear for me. Then you do the next subject. It might be English, it might be maths. You go through each subject for that day, and then you stop. Only takes 5 minutes. It takes longer to moan about than it actually takes to do. The next day you rock up, you do the same. You recall the different lessons from the day. If you've had core PE and you haven't got an exam in core PE, you don't have to write that stuff down. You only write down what's going to be useful in an exam. You don't write much down. The whole point is just to remember a little bit. You put all of this information on the study capture sheet, and then you read up the study capture sheet each night. You just read the previous days. Then you write the next days and you read the previous day. You do it every night, Monday to Thursday, we said. Friday is chip night. You don't do it on Friday night. And then you do that 5-minute habit once on the weekend to catch up with Friday. You do it every day. And we sent students the next day study capture sheets as electronic versions that they could then use. And each week is a tab at the bottom of a Google spreadsheet. Imagine the power of this habit. 5 minutes a day. How much time, we said to students, do we waste, all of us, on social media, on YouTube, on TikTok? Well, they definitely waste lots of time on TikTok because they said that they did. So 5 minutes to help you begin to remember more stuff. We know this works. If students do this, within a couple of weeks, they're going, wow, I'm remembering so much more. The brain is hanging on to the information because we're using repetition. How do we remember the lyrics to that song we used to listen to when we were a kid, and we hear it on the radio and we're suddenly singing the lyrics? We remember the lyrics through repetition. So this makes repetition quick and not too boring because it's over quite quickly. The only bits of information that get into long-term memory are dangerous information. That's not going to help us learn our GCSEs. Salient information, the fact that the information is interesting to us, that might help us with some aspects of GCSE, but much of the information we experience as students in school is not necessarily information we find interesting. So the only surefire way of getting it into the brain is repetition. So if you don't repeat, your brain will delete the information. So, and we know this because of Ebbinghaus's curve of forgetting. Ebbinghaus, a German scientist, studied his own memory, and this is the rate of forgetting. 56% within an hour, 75% within a week. Study capture begins to arrest that half-life, reverses it. Students start to build memory. Alongside study capture, we then urge students to build a flashcard habit, front and back flashcards, nice and simple, nothing revelatory there. We then said allocate a day of the week to a subject and a color of flashcard to that subject, and make 3 flashcards on a Monday for English, make 3 flashcards on a Tuesday on green flashcard paper for maths, make 3 flashcards on a Wednesday on yellow flashcard paper for French, and you read the flashcards each night. So you make 3, you read 3. On Tuesday, you make 3, you read 6, because you read Mondays as well. On Wednesday, you make 3, you read 9, because you read Tuesdays and Mondays as well. And then you create a little flashcard system on your desk. On the left-hand side of your desk at home, those are flashcards you've made that week. You just read the flashcards for 5 minutes each night. That pile will get quite tall. You don't need to read the whole pile each night. You won't be able to do that in 5 minutes. You just read down the pile for 5 minutes, put a little bookmark in and pick the pile up and start from where the bookmark is the next night. After 5 or 6 goes through that pile, the information will be in your head. You'll pick up the flashcard and you go, I know that current is a flow of electrons. I've seen that blinking card 6 times. I know that information. So you then move the information to the middle of your desk. You look at that every 2 or 3 days. And finally, after a couple more repetitions of those flashcards, you move the information to the right-hand side of your desk. You also have a beautiful set of revision cards ready to go, divided by color. So when you've got a mock for biology, you can play out all your biology flashcards. This is a 10-minute habit. 5-minute flashcards, 5 minutes for study capture. There are other elements of this habit, mind maps and effortful subjects. I'm not going to go through those in detail now because I'm going to send you after this, along with this webinar, I'm going to send you access to the Neuro Ninja Learning Hub. On there are lots of videos that explain all these habits. On there, you'll also find lots of videos that explain all the different 12 rocks of well-being. On there, you'll find lots of information that explains the brain's worry system and how to manage it. We'll support students to build fantastic well-being, manage their minds, and make sure that they're in the best possible place to learn and remember more. We finished the session, an hour and 15 minutes with each group, talking about how you might spend a little bit of time each day taking those circuits that manage your brain to the gym. And if you do that, this process of gladden, so at the end of the day, just asking yourself one thing you're grateful for, one thing you learned, one thing you achieved, one thing that delighted you, a positive emotion you experienced and why, and a new experience you had and what it was like, strengthens the circuits at the top of your brain. These are the circuits of perspective and thinking and helping you manage the complexity and build that mental flexibility we talked about. Our brains are good at focusing on problems. And we don't get to the end of the day and think, yippee, that was an amazing day. We get to the end of the day and think, oh, I've still got all that other stuff to do. And that didn't go right. And that didn't go right. Our brains focus on what's not done because they're problem-solving machines. But they can get themselves stuck in a pickle, overthinking things. And as we've seen, they're neurally plastic. So we need to learn to manage our brains carefully, slowly, but surely. We said to the students, be in absolutely no doubt that you can do this. You are the owner of an amazing brain. You can pass your GCSEs. It is not about ability. It is about what you do. That doesn't mean you're not differently able in different subjects. Of course you are. Some people prefer English. Some people prefer maths. Some people prefer dance. But whatever subjects we find difficult, if we practice those subjects in carefully constructed ways, in some of the ways that we've suggested tonight, you will be enormously successful. Students that follow this habit of learning routines to help them learn more and remember more generally get 4s and 5s at GCSE. There's another habit which we're going to come back to talk to students about in the spring called study reps, and we'll run a webinar on that as well, which makes up the rest of the grades and helps students get 6s and 7s. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I can see the question in the Q&A. Put any more in there if you wish. Happy to answer them or put them in the chat. It's only me on the call. That's why I haven't got to the Q&A just yet. Thanks for listening. And we're looking forward to working with your students all of this year. So great that so many of you could join us this evening.